You're lucky I even stay with you, my wife said during our argument. I stayed quiet and thought about everything I've been handling. The mortgage, the car payments, the insurance, even the business loan she always said was hers. What she didn't know was that I had just found messages between her and the coworker she said was just a friend. So I told her, if I'm so useless, then you won't need any of this. The next morning, I removed my name from everything. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Maumee River always looked dirtier in winter. Derek Halvorson had stared at it enough times from the warehouse loading dock to understand the way it turned a flat, gray color when the temperature dropped, when the sky pressed down low, and the whole world seemed to shrink into cold concrete and diesel exhaust. He was 24 the first year he stood on that dock. He drove a forklift through 12-hour shifts, stacking pallets of lumber and pipe fittings and drywall compound that other men would use to build houses he couldn't afford to live in yet. He didn't complain about that. Complaining was a waste of breath. You showed up, you did the work, you went home. What he was learning in those warehouse years was something he couldn't have named at the time, but would carry for the rest of his life. That the most useful thing a person can do is understand a system deeply enough to improve it. He watched the loading dock with the same attention other men used to watch the clock. He noticed where time was lost, where routing decisions created unnecessary back and forth, where the schedule was built out of habit rather than logic. He mentioned some of it to his shift supervisor and got a shrug. He mentioned more of it to the floor manager and got a longer conversation. By his third year, he was being asked to sit in on planning meetings, the only forklift driver in the room. He met Kendra on a Tuesday night at a diner called Ricky's off Monroe Street. She was waiting tables, moving fast between booths with a coffee pot in one hand and a notepad tucked into the front pocket of her apron. She had a sharp, quick smile and a way of making every customer feel like the only person in the room. Derek sat in a corner booth eating a turkey sandwich and reading the sports page, and she walked over and said, "You look like you're solving the world's problems over there." He looked up and said, "Just the Bengals' problems," which is basically the same thing. She laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite kind that comes out of professional obligation. That mattered to him. They dated for almost 2 years before moving in together. They moved in together for 2 more years before getting married. Nothing about their early life was fast or impulsive or reckless. They were practical people from practical families who understood that the life you want doesn't arrive. You build it, and you build it slowly, and you make sure the foundation is solid before you add the next floor. They lived in a small apartment on the west side of Toledo with a drafty window in the bedroom that they stuffed with a rolled-up bath towel every November when the cold came in off the lake. They drove a used pickup truck with a busted radio that only picked up one country station neither of them liked. They kept the volume low and drove in comfortable silence most of the time, and Derek thought that said something good about them, that they could be quiet together without it feeling like distance. On weekends, they both worked extra shifts. Derek picked up overtime at the warehouse whenever it was offered, 12 hours becoming 16 if the foreman needed it. Kendra covered Sunday brunch at the diner. The hardest shift of the week, all families and strollers and coffee refills. The tips unpredictable and the tables never empty. They put the extra money into a joint savings account that they reviewed together on the first of every month, sitting at the kitchen table with their mugs of coffee and the laptop open between them. They were proud of those numbers, even when they were small. Small was still movement. Small was still forward. By the time Derek moved into fleet management at Lakeview Construction Supply, things had changed. Not dramatically and not suddenly, but in the deliberate and real way that actual progress tends to happen through years of showing up and learning and making yourself indispensable. He was put in charge of routing and driver scheduling first, then maintenance oversight, then vendor contracts. Within 4 years, he was managing a fleet of 18 trucks, coordinating everything from fuel agreements to insurance renewals to the hiring and supervision of drivers. It was technical work, detail-oriented work, the kind of work that suited him precisely because it was never finished. There was always a problem to prevent, a system to improve, a cost to bring down. His salary grew. His responsibility grew with it. They bought a modest three-bedroom house on the west side of Toledo. Red brick exterior, small front yard, a detached garage that needed the roof re-shingled and the side door rehung. It wasn't much to look at from the street. Some of the neighbors had put in landscaping and updated windows and fresh paint. But it was solid, and it was theirs, and Derek paid for it with the same methodical attention he brought to everything. Every month, without exception. The mortgage, both car insurance policies, the utility accounts, property taxes, the health insurance that covered them both. He kept a detailed spreadsheet on his laptop that he updated every Sunday evening after dinner. He tracked every recurring payment, every due date, every balance. He knew where every dollar went. Kendra had moved from waitressing into dental office administration by then. She was good at it. She had a warmth on the phone and a quick organizational instinct, and patients responded well to her. The position came with regular hours and a steady paycheck, and she was proud of it. She often described herself to friends as the one who ran the household. She said it casually and often, and Derek never corrected her in those conversations. He didn't see the point. He was the one making sure everything stayed standing, and he knew that, and knowing it was enough. For years it was enough. He would think about those early years much later with a feeling he couldn't fully name. Not quite sadness, not quite regret. More like the particular ache of understanding something too late that was always there to be understood. He had been present in those years, genuinely present. Coming home tired and steady, making dinner while Kendra talked about her day, sitting on the back porch on summer evenings with a cold beer while the neighborhood settled into night. He had been content. He had been careful with everything that mattered to him. He thought that careful meant safe. He thought that quiet meant nothing was growing in the dark. He was wrong about both of those things. The morning it happened was completely unremarkable. Derek had come downstairs in his work clothes, jacket already on, keys already in his hand, moving through the kitchen the way he moved through every workday morning, efficiently and without wasted motion. He was looking for his travel mug. The kitchen counter was cluttered from the night before. Kendra's phone was lying face up next to the coffee maker. He wasn't looking at it. Then the screen lit up. The name was Tyson Bellamy. The message underneath said, "Miss you already." Derek stood still. The coffee maker finished its cycle and clicked off. Outside, a garbage truck moved slowly down the street, its brakes letting out a low groan as it stopped at each bin. He picked up the phone and read the message again. Just the 4 words and the name. Then he set the phone back down exactly where he had found it and poured his coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. He heard the shower cut off upstairs. He heard Kendra moving around, the floor creaking in the specific way it always did in the spot between the bathroom door and the dresser. He heard her in the hallway, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway in jeans and a gray sweater, toweling her hair. She stopped when she saw his face. It wasn't that he looked angry. He didn't. His face was calm in a way that was harder to read than anger, still and measured, the expression of a man who has already moved past the emotional part and is working the problem. He slid her phone across the table without saying a word. She looked at the screen. The color left her face so quickly it was like watching someone turn off a light. "Derek, who is he?" She sat down across from him. Her hands went flat on the table, fingers spread. It was a gesture he recognized as her trying to look composed, trying to slow the moment down before it accelerated. "He works near the office," she said. "It's not. It hasn't been serious. It was stupid. I know that it was stupid." "How long?" She hesitated. "A few weeks. Maybe 6, I don't know." She looked at him steadily. "I was ending it." Derek held her gaze for a long moment. He had known Kendra for 15 years. He knew the rhythm of her voice when she was being honest and when she was managing him, and he was trying to read it right now, listening for the truth underneath the words. Something was off. Something was being edited as she spoke. But she also looked genuinely scared, and genuine fear is hard to manufacture, and he was looking for a reason to believe her. He believed in fixing problems. He had built his career on the conviction that almost any broken system could be repaired if you diagnosed it correctly and applied the right solution consistently. He applied the same belief to his marriage. It was the same instinct, just pointed at something more personal. They went to counseling. A woman named Dr. Patricia Olson on Reynolds Road, Thursday evenings at 6:30. They sat in two chairs angled slightly toward each other in a warm office that smelled like bergamot and old books, and they talked. Not always easily, not always without pain, but they talked. Kendra cried in the third session and the fifth and the seventh. She talked about feeling unseen, about reaching for something she couldn't name, about the regret that had settled on her like weight the moment Derek had slid that phone across the table. She said the right things. She said them consistently. She made specific commitments. She followed through on some of them in ways Derek noticed and appreciated. For about 6 months, the marriage felt different. Not perfect, not the effortless comfort of their early years, but intentionally rebuilt, the way you rebuild a wall that is cracked, carefully, with attention to what caused it to crack in the first place. Derek watched all of it. He was not naive. He was cautious in the way a careful man is cautious after a scare, paying close attention to everything, because he had learned that the cost of inattention could be high. But things looked better. Things felt better. He wanted to believe in the repair. He noticed it again on a Tuesday in October, 8 months after the counseling sessions began. No single moment gave it away. It was the accumulation of small things, each individually explainable, collectively undeniable. The phone never left her hand anymore when she was home. When he walked into a room where she was on it, she would angle the screen away or set it face down on the near surface without looking like she was doing it. She worked late 3 times in 2 weeks at a dental office that, as she had complained to him on many occasions in the past, never needed anyone past 5 o'clock. She mentioned eating at a restaurant on her lunch break, and when Derek happened to drive past it the following week, the windows were papered over for renovation. He sat with each piece of information. He arranged them in his mind the way he arranged a maintenance problem at work, noting what fit, what didn't, what the pattern was trying to tell him. He drove past a sports bar called the Iron Post on a Friday evening in October, returning from a vendor inspection near the highway interchange, taking a longer route back because the main road was backed up. He wasn't looking for anything. He was thinking about a contract renegotiation he needed to prepare for Monday. Then he saw Kendra's silver Civic in the parking lot. He recognized it by the dent above the rear left wheel well that she had been meaning to have fixed for 2 years. He pulled into the lot without hesitating. The bar was warm and crowded and loud. A football game played across 4 screens above the bar, and the air smelled like fried food and draft beer and the particular warmth of too many people in a room that wasn't quite big enough for them. Derek moved through the crowd slowly, not rushing, looking at tables. He found her near the back of the room. She was sitting in a booth with Tyson Bellamy. Derek had never seen the man in person. He was broad-shouldered and groomed with obvious care, wearing a collared shirt open at the neck and a watch that cost more than it needed to. He was leaning across the table toward Kendra with the posture of a man who is used to being leaned into. Her hand rested near his on the table. Not touching, but near. Near was enough. Derek stopped walking when he was 3 feet from the booth. Neither of them had noticed him yet. He stood there for 1 full second, looking at the two of them in the warm bar light, and he felt something settle in him. Not spike, not erupt, but settle, like a weight dropping to the floor of his chest and staying there. They looked up at the same moment. Whatever Tyson Bellamy had been saying dissolved mid-sentence. His face went carefully neutral. Kendra's face went through surprise, and then fear, and then something that looked briefly like calculation before the tears started forming. She slid out of the booth and followed Derek outside before he had said a single word. In the parking lot, the October cold hit clean and cutting. Derek walked to the edge of the lot and stood facing the highway, watching the long lines of headlights moving in both directions, everyone with somewhere to be and a clear road ahead of them. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and stood still. Kendra caught up to him. He could hear her breathing. Derek, her voice was low and urgent. It isn't what it looks like. He turned to face her then. She had her arms folded across her chest, not from the cold, but from the instinct to protect something. Her eyes were already wet. He looked at her for a moment in the neon parking lot light, and he thought about counseling sessions on Thursday evenings and specific commitments and 6 months of careful rebuilding, and he felt the weight in his chest settle a little heavier. "We are standing in a parking lot," he said. Outside a bar where I just watched you sit with the same man I gave you a chance about 8 months ago. I know how it looks. Kendra, it looks exactly like what it is. She started to cry. Not the managed tears of the counseling office. Something rawer, more frightened. She talked about pressure at work, about not knowing how to explain what she had been feeling, about making a choice she hadn't intended to make, about how it had never meant what it looked like. Derek stood still and let her talk. The cold came off the concrete, and the bar noise seeped through the door, and the highway kept going in the distance. He heard all of it. He thought about the years. Not the bad ones, not the last months of watching and noticing and arranging the pieces in his mind. He thought about the early years, the apartment and the truck and the savings account and the work. He thought about sitting on the back porch in summer. He thought about the rolled-up towel in the drafty window, the way they had both laughed about it every November like it was a tradition instead of a problem. 15 years of life is not nothing. He gave it weight. He gave it respect. He gave her a second chance. He said so standing in that parking lot while she stood in front of him with wet eyes and her arms wrapped around herself. He said it without anger and without cruelty. But something had finished forming in him that night. Something that had been quietly constructing itself since January, since the morning he slid that phone across the kitchen table and watched the color leave her face. He couldn't have named it in that moment. It was something like a door at the end of a long hallway, closed but visible now. On the drive home, Kendra sat beside him and dried her face with her sleeve and didn't speak. Derek drove with both hands on the wheel and thought about something completely different. He thought about the financial architecture of their life together. He began, quietly and without any visible sign, to think about how it could be separated. Not out of malice, not even out of certainty. The way a careful man, when the ground beneath him has proven unstable twice, begins to think about stable ground. He was patient. He was precise. He always had been. The final argument happened on a Wednesday evening in January, in the kitchen, over something so small that Derek could barely recall it later. A bill he had noticed on the counter. 3 weeks past due. He mentioned it without accusation, the same way he would note a maintenance irregularity at work. Here is the issue. Here is the simple fix. Kendra got defensive. The defensiveness escalated the way their arguments always did, leaving the actual subject behind and moving through layers of grievance and resentment until it arrived somewhere much larger and much older. Derek stood with his back against the counter, arms folded, saying little. He had become a quieter person in arguments over the past 3 months. Not passive, not shrinking, quieter in the way a man gets quiet when he knows more than he is showing. He had been watching. He had pulled the phone account records as the primary account holder when the late nights resumed in November. He had taken screenshots of messages that appeared on Kendra's phone one Thursday morning when she left it unlocked on the nightstand, believing he was still in the shower. He had organized and saved everything. He hadn't mentioned any of it. He was waiting. Kendra moved around the kitchen as she talked, her voice rising, pulling the argument from the bill and the missed payment into territory about appreciation and effort and being taken for granted. Derek had heard variations of this before. He listened without interrupting. He watched her the way he watched everything, patiently and with total attention. "You never appreciate what I do," she said, turning to look at him from across the kitchen. "You sit there with your spreadsheets and your systems and act like running a house is just math. Like that's all it is." Derek looked at the kitchen floor. There was a small hairline crack in the tile near the base of the refrigerator that he had been meaning to seal for months. He noted it again. "You think because you pay the bills you're in charge of everything." Her voice was getting sharper. "Like money makes you the one who matters. Like that makes you something special." He looked up at her. He didn't respond. She looked at him across the kitchen with an expression that was half frustration and half something else. Something that came from believing you already know how this moment ends, that it will end the way it always ends, with the other person absorbing what you say and adjusting and moving on. "You should be grateful I even stay with you." The kitchen went silent. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. Derek stood at the counter and looked at his wife and felt the full weight of what she had just said, Not the cruelty of it, but the confidence behind it. The absolute assumption that she was doing him a favor by being present. That without her there, he would be diminished. That everything he had built and maintained and carried was simply the backdrop to her decision to stay. In his jacket pocket, his phone held the screenshots. He had not planned to use them tonight. He had not planned to say anything tonight. He had planned to say nothing for weeks more, to be methodical and complete and prepare before he made any move. But something in those words cracked the patience open. He thought about the warehouse dock and the forklift and the cold gray river. He thought about every Sunday evening with the laptop open and the spreadsheet updated and the numbers accounted for. He thought about counseling sessions and second chances and parking lots and the way a man looks when he is standing 3 feet from a booth where his wife is sitting close to another man in a warm bar on a Friday night. He didn't raise his voice. He said one sentence. "If I'm useless, you won't need anything that came from me." Kendra stared at him. The confidence went out of her face. She started to say something, then stopped. He could see her recalibrating. He could see her wondering if she had miscalculated the moment. She had. Derek unfolded his arms, set down the coffee mug he had been holding, and left the kitchen. That night, after the house went quiet and Kendra had been asleep for an hour, Derek sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open in the dark. The only light was the screen. He opened the banking portal and looked at everything. Every joint account, every automatic payment, every line of credit with his name attached. He had been building the knowledge of this architecture for weeks. He had consulted an attorney once already, quietly, by phone. He knew what was legal and what was proper and exactly how to proceed. He sat there in the dark kitchen for a long time, not moving fast, not acting from emotion, just looking at the numbers, making the decision the way he made every significant decision, completely, deliberately, and without going back. He was done. Derek was up at 5:30 the next morning, same as always. He made coffee, dressed in his work clothes, and drove through the quiet gray streets of Toledo to a bank branch on Talmadge Road. He had made an appointment 3 days earlier. He arrived 5 minutes early and waited on a vinyl chair near the door until Gerald, the branch manager who had handled his accounts for several years, came out to shake his hand. Gerald was a careful, composed man who ran his department the way Derek respected, methodically, with attention to detail and minimal wasted conversation. They sat across from each other at Gerald's desk, and Derek explained what he needed in the same tone he used at work when he was restructuring a contract. Not emotional, not rushed, just clear. Every joint account was converted to individual accounts under Derek's name. His direct deposit was rerouted to the new personal account, effective immediately. 3 credit lines that had been opened under his credit history and income were closed. He gave instructions for the mortgage payment documentation to be structured so that every contribution he had made historically was clearly recorded and attributed. Gerald asked him twice if he was certain. Derek said yes both times without qualification. He was at his desk at Lakeview by 10:15. He reviewed 2 vendor contracts, approved a maintenance order on a truck that had been showing uneven brake wear, and answered emails through the morning. He ate lunch at his desk from the small cooler he kept in his office, a turkey sandwich and an apple, and worked through the afternoon without distraction. When his colleagues stopped by to talk about the regional expansion project or complain about traffic on I-475, Derek engaged normally. He didn't look like a man who had spent the morning dismantling the financial structure of his marriage. He looked like a man having a Thursday. 2 days passed. He heard nothing. He had just gotten home from work on Saturday evening, still in his jacket, setting his keys on the hook near the door when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He answered it. Her voice was fast and loud. "What did you do?" "Derek, what did you do to the accounts?" "I separated my money from yours," he said. "You emptied everything. You can't just do that. I didn't empty anything. You have your personal checking account. Your paycheck deposits there every 2 weeks." He walked into the kitchen, set his bag down, and opened the refrigerator to see what he had for dinner. That account was always yours. That paycheck is always yours. The mortgage payment didn't go through. The credit card is saying, "I don't have. Those are my credit lines and my payment responsibilities." That's not your money, Kendra. It was never your money. There was a long silence. He could hear her breathing through it, could hear her trying to find the next argument. "We need to talk about this," she finally said, her voice dropping lower. "You can't just make these decisions unilaterally. I'll be in touch through my attorney." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. He noticed the tile crack near the refrigerator, the one he had been meaning to seal. He went under the sink, found the tube of sealant he had bought 3 weeks ago and never used, and fixed it properly. He pressed the sealant into the crack and smoothed it with his thumb and stepped back and looked at it. Then he made dinner. Kendra called Tyson twice before she got her car. He picked up on the second call with a careful brightness in his voice, the tone of a man taking the temperature of a situation before committing to it. She told him she needed to see him. Somewhere private. He suggested the parking lot of a grocery store near Oregon, and she drove there in the gathering dark of a February evening and pulled in next to his car and got in the passenger seat. The heater was running. He handed her nothing, offered nothing, just looked at her with an expression of attentive concern. She took a breath and laid it out clearly. Derek had removed his income from their shared accounts. She was going to lose the house if something didn't change within 60 days. She needed help managing the immediate pressure while she figured out what came next. She said it all without tears, in the efficient voice of a woman presenting a problem she believes is solvable. Tyson listened with his hands resting on the steering wheel and his eyes on the windshield. She could see his jaw tighten slightly. She had seen him in a lot of different situations over the months. Confident, charming, generous in the reckless way of men who don't plan to pay the bill. But she had not seen him like this. Still, processing. She could see something happening behind his eyes, and she did not love the shape of it. "So you're actually getting divorced," he said when she finished. "Yes, but if we can get through the next few months, that's a lot of moving pieces." He turned to look at her. His voice was careful now, everything metered out with precision. Court proceedings, financial stuff, legal back and forth. That gets complicated fast. Kendra looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to be my lawyer. I'm asking, I know what you're asking." He said it gently but clearly. "I'm just saying, I need to be honest with you. I'm not in a position for that level of involvement right now." The parking lot was quiet around them. A woman walked past pushing a cart. Kendra thought about something Tyson had said to her in October in a restaurant booth over a bottle of wine, about the life that was waiting for people brave enough to reach for it. She had believed that. She had held it up against her life and found her life lacking. She thought about it now, sitting in his warm car in a grocery store parking lot while he explained, in measured and reasonable tones, why he couldn't help her. "You told me." She stopped. Started again. "The things you said, I meant what I said when I said it." He looked at the windshield again. Things feel different when the real weight of it comes down. She didn't call him after that night. There was no point. She already understood. He stopped answering within a week. Within 2 weeks, her calls didn't go through at all. She called once from a different number, and it rang through to voicemail, his voice cheerful on the outgoing message, completely unbothered by the world. The man she had destroyed her marriage for had simply stepped back and watched the smoke blow the other direction, as if none of it had ever happened, as if she had never happened. She sat in her own car in that parking lot for a long time after he drove away. The grocery store's automatic doors kept opening and closing in the background as people moved in and out, ordinary people with ordinary evenings ahead of them, carts and bags, and the simple forward motion of a life that was still coherent. She watched them without seeing them, running back through the past year in her mind with the specific kind of clarity that only comes when there is nothing left to protect. She had told herself a story, not a lie, exactly. She had believed it completely, which made it something worse than a lie. She had told herself that the problem in her marriage was Derek, that his steadiness was really rigidity, that his organization was really control, that the quiet evenings and the maintained spreadsheet and the predictable Sundays were the symptoms of a life that had gone small. She had told herself that Tyson represented something larger, something more alive, something worth the risk. She understood now, sitting in a grocery store parking lot in the cold dark of a February evening, that she had mistaken the fire for the house. The fire was warm and bright, and it had felt like freedom. But you cannot live in a fire. The house was what you lived in. The house was what kept the cold out. and she had burned the house down to sit beside the fire, and now the fire was gone too, and there was nothing on either side but open air and the coming winter. The mortgage payment failure generated a notice that arrived in the mail 10 days later. Kendra stood the front door in the cold morning air and read it twice, then went back inside and sat at the kitchen table and looked at it. She called the bank. They explained the situation. She called Derek. He didn't answer. She left a message. He didn't return it. She called her attorney, a man named Prentice who had been recommended by a friend, and Prentice told her that the financial separation Derek had executed was legal and that her options were limited. He used words like unfortunately and in the short term, and will address it in the proceedings. She thanked him and hung up. The dental office was the next problem. She had missed 2 shifts in February managing paperwork and phone calls, and her supervisor, Dr. Paulson, had been understanding but clear. The schedule was what it was, and missed shifts affected the patients and the whole office. She asked for extra hours to compensate for the lost income. He told her, with genuine regret, that the schedule was full. She was already working the hours they could give her. The credit card bills arrived in envelopes she had barely thought about for years because Derek had handled them as automatically as he handled everything else. Now the minimum payment amounts sat on the kitchen table and looked at her in a way that numbers hadn't looked at her since she was 22 and serving breakfast to strangers for unpredictable tips. The feeling was familiar in a way that was almost physical, the feeling of standing too close to an edge, of calculating something that does not add up. She started making calls. Friends she had been meaning to reach out to, people from her social circle who had been part of her life for years. Some answered warmly and with sympathy, and then found reasons to keep things vague when she got specific about what she needed. Others didn't answer at all. Word had moved through the shared networks the way it always does in a city that is not quite large enough to keep things compartmentalized. People knew something had happened. Most people, when given the choice between proximity to stability and proximity to a difficult situation, moved toward stability. She was learning this. The car was repossessed on a Thursday afternoon in late February. She came out of the dental office after a long morning of patient check-ins and stood in the parking lot looking at the empty space where her silver Civic had been. No note, no warning other than the 3 letters she had not responded to in time. Just the absence of a car she had driven for 4 years, gone from the asphalt like it was never there. She stood there for a long moment in the cold parking lot. The sky was white. A pigeon walked along the curb near the building's entrance, methodical and unbothered. She watched it for a moment, then took out her phone to figure out how to get home. She borrowed a car from Donna, a friend from the office. Donna was generous with it, but had her own life and her own schedule, and the arrangement was provisional and fragile from the beginning. On the days Donna needed the car back by noon, Kendra took the bus. The Toledo area regional transit bus routes ran when they ran, and twice she arrived at work late and apologetic, her cheeks cold from waiting, her composure fraying at the edges. Dr. Paulson called her into his office on a Friday afternoon. He was seated behind his desk with his hands folded and an expression of genuine regret on his face. He told her the office was reducing her hours, 3 days a week instead of 5. He cited consistency and scheduling challenges and used the word unfortunately more than once. He was kind about it. Kindness didn't change what it meant. The house entered formal foreclosure proceedings in March. One evening, Kendra sat on the living room floor, not on the couch, on the floor, for no particular reason except that the couch felt too much like something normal, and she did not feel normal. The room was the same as it had always been. The lamp from her grandmother's apartment. The curtains she had hung the first summer they moved in. The television Derek had carried up from the truck himself because the delivery window was inconvenient. All of it present and ordinary and entirely indifferent. She sat there and cried in the way people cry when they're fully alone and there is nothing left to manage or perform. It came out of somewhere deep and quiet and exhausted. She cried for a long time in the ordinary living room of the house she was losing, surrounded by things she had not noticed in years because they had always simply been there. She had always believed Derek needed her. The belief had been so natural and complete, she had never once turned it over to look at the other side. She had thought of herself as the warmth and vitality of their life together, and him as the stable structure beneath it. Important, yes, but secondary. The floor rather than the room. She was beginning to understand what happens when the floor disappears. Derek filed in April. He and Carolyn Birch, his attorney, had been meeting since February in her office on Summit Street, a quiet and organized space that smelled like printer paper and fresh coffee. Carolyn was methodical and thorough and spoke in complete sentences with very little wasted language. Derek appreciated all three qualities. They had spent those weeks building the case in layers: financial records, mortgage histories, payment documentation, tax returns, insurance policies, the paper trail of a man who had been carrying a household essentially alone for 8 years. He had also given Carolyn the screenshots. She had looked through them carefully, scrolling without hurry, and then looked at Derek across her desk and said simply, "These are useful." He nodded. He didn't say anything more about them. They weren't a weapon. They were evidence. There was an important difference between those two things. The papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Kendra called that night at 10 past 11. Derek was in bed reading a book about logistics optimization he had been meaning to get to for months. He picked up on the third ring. Her voice was different from the screaming phone call in February. It was quieter now, smaller, the voice of someone who has lost several layers of armor and is feeling the cold. "Derek," she said, "before this goes any further, can we talk? Just the two of us. What would you like to say?" "I want to say," she paused. He could hear her gathering herself. "I know what I did. I'm not trying to pretend otherwise. I made real mistakes. Choices that I can't defend. I know that. I know you know that. But we've been together 15 years. We built something together. And I don't think throwing all of that away is. I already gave you 2 chances, Kendra." She was quiet for a moment. "I know. The first time, I believed what you said. I went to counseling with you. I worked at it. I gave it everything I had. Then you made the same choice again. Then you made it again after that, and kept making it for months. I know." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "There's nothing left to fix." She started to say something else. He could hear the preparation of it, the particular breath she took before she pushed into an argument she wasn't sure was going to land. He waited until she had the first word out, and then he said, gently and finally, "Good night, Kendra." He set the phone on the nightstand and went back to his book. He read for 20 more minutes, finished the chapter, and put the bookmark in. He turned off the light. He had been sleeping very well for months. He slept well that night, too. The Lucas County Courthouse in downtown Toledo is a solid, gray stone building that takes the cold weather seriously. Derek arrived at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning in late May in a navy suit and a measured frame of mind. He carried a leather portfolio containing everything Carolyn had told him to bring, which was organized by date and type and labeled precisely in the way he organized everything that mattered. He sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Carolyn while she went through her notes one final time. She was composed and thorough, exactly the qualities Derek had hired her for. He sat beside her and looked at the hallway, the scuffed linoleum floors and the fluorescent lights, and the bulletin board near the water fountain with its outdated laminated notices. Other people moved through in clusters, attorneys with rolling bags, a family speaking quietly near the elevators, a court officer eating something out of a paper bag by the door. The ordinary machinery of a place that processes the weight of people's lives every single business day. Kendra arrived at 9:15 with Prentice. Her attorney walked with the deliberate confidence of a man who has been in many courtrooms and knows how to use a room. He wore a suit that was well cut but slightly too polished for the occasion, the suit of a man performing competence rather than simply having it. Kendra walked beside him in a dark blazer and slacks, her hair done carefully. She looked like she had slept poorly for weeks and was covering it with effort. She didn't look at Derek when she came in. He watched her for a moment and then turned back to the portfolio. In the courtroom, Prentice moved quickly to establish his frame. His argument was built on the idea of financial abandonment, that Derek had, without notice or negotiation, unilaterally dismantled the financial life of the marriage in a way that deliberately harmed Kendra. He spoke about the shared nature of the household, about Kendra's contributions of time and emotional labor, about the destabilizing effect of Derek's actions on her ability to meet basic obligations. He was articulate and smooth, and his argument was built for a judge who would not ask too many questions. Judge Patricia Ferris asked questions. She was a deliberate woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the posture of someone who has seen enough courtroom theater to be entirely immune to it. She let Prentice complete his argument. Then she turned to Carolyn. Carolyn laid out the documents. Bank statements going back 9 years. Mortgage payment records in Derek's name for every single month since purchase. Insurance policy histories. Car loan origination documents and payment records. Federal tax returns showing the income contribution breakdown year over year. Property tax receipts. Utility account histories. The full picture of who had been doing what in concrete and verifiable numbers for the entire duration of the marriage. The numbers did not argue. They simply showed what had happened, month after month, year after year. Derek's income had been the primary structural support of the household throughout the marriage. Kendra's income, real and documented, had covered a fraction of the total cost of their shared life. This was not a narrative Carolyn was constructing. It was arithmetic. Derek sat with his hands folded on the table and let the document speak. He had learned a long time ago that the strongest position is usually the quiet one, that a man who has the facts doesn't need to perform. He had arrived with the facts. He had prepared them meticulously, organized them cleanly, and trusted them to say what they said. He looked at Judge Ferris reading the documents and thought about nothing in particular. He was calm in a way that he was always calm when he had done the preparation correctly. The work was done. The rest was just process. Prentice tried several angles. He suggested that financial contributions were not the only measure of a marital partnership. He raised the concept of emotional labor, of household management, of the intangible contributions that don't appear in bank statements. He was not wrong that those things existed. He was wrong that they could outweigh 9 years of documented primary financial support in a case where the financial record was as clear and complete as the one in front of the court. Judge Ferris listened to each argument with the same patient expression. She wrote notes. She did not look persuaded. Judge Ferris spent a long time with the documents. She put on her glasses and read. She asked Carolyn 2 questions, both specific and technical. She asked Prentice 1 question and listened to his answer with the patient neutrality of someone filing information rather than weighing it. She called a 20-minute recess. Derek and Carolyn sat in the hallway. Derek drank a coffee from the vending machine near the elevator and looked out a window at the parking lot below, at the rows of cars and the thin spring light. Carolyn checked her notes 1 more time. Neither of them said much. There was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said. When court reconvened, Carolyn presented the second part of the case. At the initial filing, she had submitted a motion to include documentation of the affair as evidence material to the breakdown of the marriage. Prentice had objected, arguing the marital conduct was not relevant to the financial questions before the court. Judge Ferris had reviewed the motion and allowed it, noting its relevance to the established timeline of the marriage's deterioration and the context of financial decisions made in direct response. Carolyn presented the documentation without drama. The exchange of messages, the dates of the original discovery, and the counseling sessions that followed. The specific commitments Kendra had made in those sessions, on record with Dr. Olson's practice. The dates on which the affair had demonstrably resumed, based on the messages Derek had documented and preserved. The duration of the deception, not a lapse, not a momentary failure, but months of deliberate ongoing contact after Kendra had stood in the counselor's office and said it was over. The timeline was clear and complete. The pattern was undeniable. Prentice objected again. Judge Ferris overruled him without deliberating. She looked at the documentation in the same careful way she looked at everything else, methodically, without expression, in the way of a person who is paid to see through what is being presented to what is actually there. Then she looked at Kendra. Kendra sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, her posture upright and controlled. Prentice leaned close and said something quietly near her ear. She nodded once, a small and contained movement, and kept her eyes forward. Derek watched none of this with satisfaction. He sat straight in his chair and looked at Judge Ferris and waited the way he had learned to wait. The written ruling came 17 days later. Divorce finalized, effective immediately upon the date of the decision. The family home, at this point deep into foreclosure proceedings, was awarded to the bank. There was no marital asset left to divide because the single largest asset of the marriage had already been consumed by the debt that accumulated when the primary income supporting it was properly and legally separated. Financial support from Derek was denied. The court's written decision cited the documented financial history, which established that Derek had carried the household disproportionately throughout the marriage, combined with the documented pattern of infidelity and deception on Kendra's part, and found no equitable basis on which to compel continued financial obligation. Kendra walked out of the courthouse on a warm May afternoon with Prentice, still talking beside her about the decision and the available options. The sky was bright and wide over downtown Toledo, the kind of blue that arrives in late spring without warning and makes the city look briefly like a different place. She stood on the courthouse steps while Prentice finished his analysis, and she nodded at the right moments and held herself together. Then Prentice moved away to take a call, and Kendra stood alone on the steps for a moment. Her composure held for 3 more seconds. Then it didn't. Not dramatically. She didn't cry out or collapse. Just quietly, in the way a face changes when the thing it has been holding up for months is finally too heavy to hold. Everything shifted. She stood on the courthouse steps in the spring light with her eyes full and her jaw set, and the decision settling into her like cold water. By autumn, she was sleeping on a pull-out couch in the guest space of a friend named Donna, who lived in a rental apartment in East Toledo. Donna was a genuinely kind person with a small apartment and a full and busy life of her own. She had offered the space without hesitation, and she never made Kendra feel directly unwelcome. But a pull-out couch in someone else's apartment is not a home. The smallness of it accumulates over days and then weeks. The awareness that you are an inconvenience in someone else's life, however loved and generously hosted, wears on you in ways that are hard to name but impossible to ignore. The dental office had reduced her hours further after the missed shifts during the move and the legal process. She was down to 3 days a week now. It was enough to survive on barely month-to-month bus fare and groceries and the small rent she paid Donna, and almost nothing else. She had applied for 2 other administrative positions. The first one didn't call back. The second called, interviewed her by phone, and then in person, and then went quiet for 3 weeks before she stopped waiting. Most of the friends who had been part of her life for years were simply absent now. Some of them, she understood. They had been Derek's friends first, or friends of the couple who had made a quiet choice about where their loyalty landed. Others were simply people who were comfortable in comfort and scarce in difficulty. She had known this was a quality people sometimes had. She had not realized how many of the people she knew had it until she needed them. Tyson had been unreachable for 5 months. She had driven past his apartment building once in October, borrowing Donna's car for an errand that took her through that part of the city. She hadn't planned to go past it. She just found herself there. His car was in the parking lot below his unit. The lights in his windows were on. She sat across the street for a few minutes, the car idling, looking at the lit windows, and then she pulled out and drove away. There was nothing there. There had never been anything real there. She could see that now with a completeness that felt almost clinical. On an evening in early December, she took the bus to the Lake Erie shoreline. She didn't have a plan. She just needed somewhere large, somewhere that had no memory attached to it, no weight of everything that had been lost. She got off at the stop near the waterfront park and walked to the edge of the lake and sat on a bench with her coat pulled tight and her hands tucked in her sleeves. The lake in December is gray and serious. The water moves with a flat, sustained energy, the waves rolling and low, and even without the drama of a storm, but with a permanence that is its own kind of power. The sky was the same shade as the water, and the horizon was a thin dark line between them, and the cold came off the surface in long, steady streams that cut through any coat you were wearing and reminded you that Lake Erie doesn't accommodate you. It is simply there, and you are small beside it. Kendra sat and looked at the water for a long time. She thought about the apartment with the drafty window and the rolled-up towel. She thought about the first-of-the-month ritual with the savings account and the laptop on the kitchen table and the mugs of coffee. She thought about Derek's hands on the steering wheel of the truck with the broken radio, one hand easy on the wheel, his face turned toward the road. The patience in him, the groundedness of a man who had decided who he was going to be and simply proceeded to be it, without drama and without deviation. She thought about sitting across the kitchen and telling him he should be grateful she stayed. She had said it the way you say something you have believed for so long that it doesn't feel like a belief anymore, just a fact. She had believed she was the thing that made the life worth living, the color in a structure he had built. She had not understood that the structure was itself a form of love, constant and precise and uncelebrated, showing up without acknowledgement in the form of a mortgage payment on the first of every month, a maintained vehicle, a spreadsheet updated every Sunday evening so nothing broke and nothing fell. The waves came in. The cold came off the water. She cried without covering her face, without managing it for a long time. The real kind, the kind that comes out of a place so deep it doesn't bring relief when it's finished, just exhaustion and a particular clarity. The particular clarity was this. She had never once asked Derek what he needed. In 15 years, she had not thought to wonder. She had assumed his needs were simple because he expressed them simply. The fishing trips, the organized Saturday, the coffee in the morning before anything else was asked of him. She had mistaken the compactness of his life for shallowness. She had mistaken a man who wasted nothing for a man who felt nothing. She had been wrong about both in ways that were now completely visible to her and completely too late. She had made her choices, 2 times, clearly, with complete awareness of what she was choosing. She had believed there would be no real consequence because she had believed Derek would always be there to contain the consequence. She had been wrong about almost everything. She took the bus home in the dark and got back to Donna's apartment and made a cup of tea and sat by the window and watched the city lights. Derek's house in Rossford sat on a quiet street 2 blocks from a stretch of open fields that turned gold in late summer and kept a gray, stripped beauty all through winter. It was a white frame house, nothing large, nothing that announced itself, just a clean and solid house with a narrow front porch and a yard he kept maintained. The previous tenant had neglected a few things. Derek fixed them in the first month, one by one, in the evenings after work. He replaced a light fixture in the kitchen that had been flickering since before he moved in. He repaired a section of the backyard fence that had warped in the wet fall weather. He resealed the windows before November arrived, pressing the weather stripping cleanly with his thumb and stepping back to check the seal. He replaced the bathroom faucet, which had a slow drip that would have bothered him indefinitely if he left it. He fixed a sticking door. He painted the back hallway, one coat on a Saturday morning, and stood back and looked at it and felt the particular satisfaction of a problem that is fully resolved. The house became his in the way that spaces become yours when you're the only one in them, through the accumulation of small decisions and familiar routines. The coffee brewing at 5:30. The way the kitchen light came through the side window in the morning. The sound of the field behind the house in the wind. Work was good, better than good. The Lakeview fleet had grown, and the regional expansion project that Derek had been brought into was gaining real shape. He was designing the logistics architecture for a new depot operation near Findlay. Routing systems, vendor agreements, driver contracts, the full structure. It was the most complex project he had managed, and it engaged him completely. Roger, his director, had been straightforward with him in October over lunch. The company was watching how this project developed, and if it went the way it was looking, there was a larger role waiting. Derek had thanked him without excessive enthusiasm. He went back to his desk and worked. On weekends, he fished. He had always fished, but it had become something specific in the past year. A practice, almost a discipline. He kept a small aluminum boat at a marina in Oregon, nothing fancy, built for function and not appearance. He took it out early on Saturday, and sometimes Sunday mornings, before the recreational traffic on the lake picked up, before the noise of the weekend got going. He would be on the water before dawn sometimes, the sky still black above the lake, and the only light coming from his boat lamp and the distant blink of navigation buoys. He would cut the engine and just sit. The lake in those early hours was almost completely silent. The water moved without urgency. The sky changed slowly from black to a deep navy blue to the thin gold strip along the eastern horizon that arrived about 20 minutes before the actual sun. He sat in the cold with his coffee and his line in the water, and nothing to manage and nothing to account for. And his mind went quiet in a way it had not gone quiet in years. Maybe not in his entire adult life. He had dinner with his brother Greg and Greg's wife on Friday nights. He played poker with the work group on the first Saturday of every month. He had started going to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings before work, which had been a suggestion from his doctor at his last physical and had turned out to be worth following. He felt better physically than he had in years. He had dinner with his brother Greg and Greg's wife on Friday nights. He played poker with the work group on the first Saturday of every month. He had started going to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings before work, which had been a suggestion from his doctor at his last physical and had turned out to be worth following. He felt better physically than he had in years. His social life was not large, but it was real. He had learned the difference, somewhere in his 30s, between a crowded life and a good one. The people who showed up for dinner on Fridays and poker on Saturdays were people he had known for years, people with whom he could sit in comfortable silence or argue about football without either being a sign of something wrong. Relationships that asked nothing dramatic of him and gave something back in return. He had not realized, until they were clearly visible against the contrast of what his marriage had become, how little of that he had been getting at home. He was not unhappy. He had expected the solitude to carry more loneliness than it did. He had prepared himself for it, built a plan for managing it, the way he built a plan for anything he anticipated as a challenge. But the loneliness he had prepared for never fully arrived. What arrived instead was the experience of his own life, undiluted. No secondary story running alongside his in another room. No management of another person's mood. No performance of being fine. There were moments, sitting on the back porch in the late afternoon with the field going gold behind the fence, when he thought about the years with a kind of settled honesty. He didn't pretend they had been all bad. They hadn't. He didn't pretend that Kendra had been a stranger to him, that 15 years of shared life had left nothing real behind. They had. He allowed himself to hold all of it without resolving it into something simpler. He had loved her. He had given the marriage everything he had. He had made the choices he needed to make when it became clear that the giving was only going one direction. None of that was complicated. It was just the truth. He kept the photo album in a box in the closet. He didn't throw it away, and he didn't display it. He put it where things go when they are finished but not erased. That seemed right. He ran into Kendra in early December outside a convenience store on Secker Road. He was coming out the door with a paper bag, coffee, and a sandwich for the drive back from a supplier visit. She was standing near a bench at the edge of the parking lot, looking at her phone. He saw her before she saw him. He had time to see her clearly, in the way you can see someone when they don't know you're looking. The dark green coat that was slightly too big, the way she was standing with one hand in her pocket and the other holding the phone loosely, not really reading it. She looked up when he was 5 feet from her. Derek. Her voice was quiet and controlled. Not managed the way it used to be. Careful, tactical, searching for leverage. Just quiet, like someone who has run out of tactics and is simply standing in what remains. He stopped. He looked at her. The 15 years were right there between them in the cold air of the parking lot. All of it present, all of it real, none of it going anywhere. He wasn't angry. The anger had exhausted itself months ago, burned off in the methodical work of attorneys and bank meetings and spreadsheets updated Sunday after Sunday. What replaced it wasn't triumph, wasn't relief, wasn't anything he had a ready name for. Just the clear-eyed recognition of what had happened and what it had cost, and the understanding that some things, once broken past a certain point, do not get reassembled. I'm sorry, she said. She held his gaze when she said it. No flinching, no performance. Just the 2 words, offered plainly. I know that doesn't change anything. I needed to say it. He looked at her for a moment. He believed her. He heard the truth in it clearly. The real thing. The weight of genuine regret, different in texture and rhythm from every version of Sorry that had come before. He believed it, and it did not change a single thing. "I gave you 2 chances," he said. Her eyes filled. She nodded once, a small, final nod, the nod of someone who has moved past contesting what is true. Derek held her gaze for another second. There was no coldness in it, no cruelty, no desire to let the moment land harder than it needed to. Just this simple and irrevocable fact of it. He had given what he could give. She had made her choices. The story had arrived at its ending. He nodded once. Then he walked to his truck, set the paper bag on the passenger seat, and pulled out of the parking lot on a Secker road. He merged into traffic and drove south through the early December afternoon. The light was doing what winter light does in Toledo, coming in low and sideways, turning everything a particular shade of pale gold before the dark came. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the window cracked enough to let in the cold, the radio playing low. He thought about Saturday. He had checked the forecast: cold, clear, winds light until mid-afternoon. Good conditions. He was planning to be on the water before 6. He thought about the Finley Depot routing structure he had been sketching on a legal pad at his desk, the way the distribution sequence could be optimized if the first pickup window was moved earlier. He needed to model it properly, run the numbers on fuel cost against time efficiency, but he thought there was something there. He thought about Greg's place on Friday, the usual dinner, the ease of an evening with people who were simply in his life without complication. The road opened up ahead of him. The city thinned out, and the fields came in on either side. The gold light held for a few more minutes, touching the tops of the empty trees at the field edges. Then it softened and began to fade, the sky going silver at the horizon, the first stars faint above the tree line to the east. He drove toward them. He thought about the lake on Saturday morning, the darkness before sunrise, the way the surface looked black and perfectly still in the hour before the light, and the strange peace of sitting in a small boat at the center of that much silence with nothing required of him. He had come to understand in the past year that silence was not the absence of something. It was a thing in itself, a quality of life he had not known he was missing until he had it. He thought about the Finley Depot project and the routing structure he had been building in the margins of his work notebook. There was a sequence problem in the Eastern distribution loop that had been nagging at him for 2 weeks. He thought he had to fix now. He would run the numbers in the morning. He thought about Friday dinner at Greg's. The usual easy noise of it, Greg's kids asking him questions about trucks, his sister-in-law's cooking, the kind of uncomplicated warmth that asks nothing except that you show up. He was going to show up. The road opened ahead of him. The fields came in on either side of the highway, and the city fell away behind him. And the last of the gold light touched the tops of the bare trees at the field edges before fading into silver and then into the deep blue that comes before dark. He drove through all of it with both hands easy on the wheel. His life was his own, entirely and without condition. That was everything he needed.